Now we're moving to the fourth session on infrastructure. Our chair for this session is Tunç Uyanık from TEPAV. And our lead speakers are King Jing Yang from Renmin University, Yong Wang from Peking University. We have Nikola Jovanovic from CIRSD. And we'll have a Skype conference. Yes, we have Richard Manning from Oxford University connecting us via Skype. Hello. Hello.
It is difficult for us to follow after a very interesting session on trade. Our session is going to focus on infrastructure. We have very distinguished panelists. One of our panelists is joining us on video from Oxford, and we will try to make the best out of it and be efficient as much as we can so that we beat the time constraint. Now, on infrastructure, are we starting or are we? Okay. Infrastructure has been an issue for not only for this G20 presidency, but also during the past year's presidency. It is one of the hot topics. Everybody's talking about it today. Also, during other sessions, we heard a lot about infrastructure. In the last year's presidency, it was one of the very rare areas that Australian presidency came up with concrete outcomes. They have created 3 different entities. One was GII, the other one was GIH, the Global Infrastructure Hub, which is created in Australia. And the third one was the Global Infrastructure Facility, which was created by the World Bank. At this time, last year, I was leading the World Bank team, putting together the Global Infrastructure Facility. When we were working on that facility, we found out that there were 2 issues. One is obviously the funding issue, the liquidity issue for infrastructure investments. But even more importantly, the issue was that because of the nature of the infrastructure investments, especially the greenfield ones, it was very difficult to bring in investors to invest on a longer term and more complex, more riskier projects. Especially this was true following the crisis. So we thought, what can we do, to bring people on board? And the idea behind the Global Infrastructure Facility was to create a platform where you can do 2 things. On the upstream side, you would provide technical assistance, act as an honest broker in the platform through using the World Bank capacity, as well as other DFIs, so that the projects could be in a way validated. And on the downstream side, it would be bringing funding together again on the platform where people can coordinate and cooperate jointly. The outcomes are not there yet, so we don't know what's happening and what will be the result, because it's a tough project. And as it is now, it's already going through issues. But I hope that it will be good. But now, here in the panel, I know my colleagues have also very different and good ideas about how to address this problem about infrastructure, which boils down in the end of the day. One is how to make sure that the projects are trustworthy in a way so that people can come and invest. And the other one is how to finance such large projects, how to bring people together with their money. So I will start with the sequence that we have here. I will first ask our distinguished speaker, Qing Qingyan from Renmin University, and then we will continue. Please.
Thanks to the chairman. It's my great honor to attend this important workshop. It's my first time to Istanbul. I would like to pay my tribute to all the members of the T20 organization, especially for the TPAF and the CIGI. First of all, I want to introduce myself and our institution. I come from Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University of China. This is a new think tank established in January 2013. This is a very young think tank, but we have already organized twice the G20 think tank conference in the last 2 years. And some of today's guests have already been there to participate our conference. And we have already published a series of G20 blue books and reports. Besides the G20 research, we focus on also the Belt and the Road Initiative, and also the internet finance and eco-financial studies. As you know, China will host the 2016 G20 summit. So our institute will try our best to make more contribution on the G20 agenda with the cooperation with all T20 participants around the world. So go back to the topic of infrastructure. We all know its importance, and it's getting to become the new key driver of global growth, especially for some developing countries. Yesterday, I participated into the B20 Infrastructure and Investment Task Force as an observer. We mentioned that the total global spent on infrastructure project is 9 trillion per year. Despite this significant investment, we still face an estimated gap of 15 to 20 trillion by 2030. This funding gap comes from both the public and the private sector. So in order to close the investment gap and to match the long-term need of infrastructure, as the chairman said, we have already some idea for the solution. First of all, we have to encourage the private investment participation through the use of innovative financing and appropriate PPP models. Since PPP often involves complex operation and administration requirements, so the capacity building and share of best practice could be considered a part of infrastructure investment initiative. That's also the important reason for the establishment of the Global Infrastructure Hub, which was fixed during G20 Australia as an knowledge sharing platform and network to foster cooperation. But I think this is still very hard to make the implementation. It still needs a long time to realize. Secondly, we have to increase multilateral development bank support, such as the launch of the World Bank's Global Infrastructure Facility, the GIF, and the support similar from other development banks. I think for the GIF, it aims to play the role of a banker between public and the private stakeholder infrastructure project. I think it will be very constructive for the future of infrastructure development, but still very difficult to take real progress in the practice, such as sharing data, something like that. Finally, from the China perspective, we made infrastructure connective as one of the main topics for the discussion while hosting the APEC summit in last November. I think this is the third one we have to mention, the our initiative for the establishment of Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, we call the AIIB. I think this is a new military financial organization to enhance Asia's infrastructure development and connectivities. It originates in China, but in my view, as a new military financial organization, it will migrate to an important platform for Asia countries to build a partnership, and for countries around the world, developed countries and developing ones, Asia and other regions alike. It will play an important role in fostering connectivity, financial cooperation, and many other fields. I believe in the end it will also stimulate the world's economic growth and contribute to the global push for infrastructure investment as well. This is not only beneficial for the G20 economies, but also very meaningful for other nations. As the second world largest economy, China will make more contribution and effort in the field of infrastructure. And I think it will be one of the most important topic in 2016 G20 agenda as well. So that's all my some point of view for the infrastructure for your conference. Thanks.
Thank you, Xingxing. Now, our second speaker is our dear friend, Professor Wang Yong from Peking University. Wang Yong.
Thank you, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I have the special thank to the co-host of this very important workshop, TTAP and CG. It's my pleasure to see. So usually, I talk about the trade in the formal sessions of the T20. But I would like to try this new topic. I would like to make several points. First of all, I think we need attach strategic significance, to the infrastructure investment in the G20 agenda. Now I think we see growing attention to this topic, but I think that is the G20 is a place for the leaders to make strategic decisions and political decisions. So I think there will be a very proper for the G20 to raise the value of the infrastructure investment and to attach the strategic significance to this. Why that? So I think that is infrastructure can be a very good link to the issues like growth, development, yes, and so on. So I think that is just to have the isolated value. It is have a lot of spill over the values. So I think that is a lot of things, especially the global economy is in the stages of changing phase. Now in China, we talk about the new normal, the new normal of the Chinese economy. And we might apply this concept in the other economies. So I think definitely, because we are still in the post-global financial crisis era, we will continue to see more the changes to the faces. So I think will be very interesting to see. So I think in this process of the economic transformations, I think the infrastructure investment can play a larger role. The second point I would like to mention how to justify to put in more the emphasis on this topic. First of all, we have seen there is a big gap between the demand for the investment infrastructures and the actual amount of investment in this regard, and the growing gap between the demand and the capacity of the existing international development financings. So there is a big gap there. We should figure out the more effective ways to address this gap. So I think there is some data, okay, that comes from the ADB investigation report. So that is the big. So I think that gap is as large as in trillions of dollars. So just in the Asian economies. So I think that is a big gap. That also a big potential of us to tap. So to the developing countries. So I think there is a lot of countries in Asia, for example, has a very big the population, but has a very big potential as a consumer markets. But unfortunately, at this moment, okay, that is because of the shortage of investment, the infrastructures. So all this potential hasn't yet tapped out. So I think that is a pity, but there's also opportunities. So for examples, in the case of China, in China's development, so the infrastructure investment play a very important role in the pushing forward the growth. So yesterday in the conversation with Dr. Guven Sak, he had some interesting observations from his recent visit to China. He traveled from the southern part of China to the northern part, like Beijing, and he has a very interesting observation that China, as developing countries, has tackled the problem of infrastructure. That is very important observations. But I think, yes, I think that is true. The infrastructure investment play a very, very important role in China. It is China might be to compare with the other developing countries. Okay, China has the Chinese government has such kind of power positions in mobilizing resources to invest this in the field. But one more thing I would like, I think in the future, I think to come, the infrastructure investment will continue to play a very important role. So now we see more the projects, more investment in the high speed, the train the systems. So in the urban, the urbanizations, we see the more investment. We can expect more investment in the intercity, inter-region transportation systems. So I think that is a case. So about the developing countries, so they are great potential. In the regard of the infrastructure structures. But too interesting. I think the growing attention to this topic in the public policy discussions in the developing country as well. So for examples, in Australia, in the United States, right, so the infrastructures also be put on the quite in the top priorities for this year. So I think that is a very, very interesting development. I think that is to maintain, because so we should improve the poorly, I think, maintain the transportation systems and such as we need a renewal of the infrastructure, the systems. So I think more important factors, and I see in justifying this infrastructure investment. So we need check the financial speculations. So I think that is a very big lessons comes from the global financial crisis. But why? So that we have the crisis because we are in now we have developed financial globalizations. but sometimes we have too much, excessive, the capital. They have the freedom to move around across the borders, right? But so I think the time for us to figure out the effective ways to lead this excessive investment into the fields like infrastructures, to reduce the growth, continuous growth, also called the virtual economy, or the economy based on the financial speculations. So I think that if we can, do something around here, so I think will be very, very important thing. So last point. So what suggestions do I have for the G20 agenda for the Turkish G20 presidency? So I think based on what I have argued, I think G20 agenda for this year, the one is should continue. Should give more emphasis on the continuities, on the attaching the significance to the infrastructures. So the members of Troika, Australia, Turkey and China the next year. Okay, we should have a good discussions about how to maintain the continuities. So how to link our agenda to each other. How to push forward the objectives of growth, development via more investment in infrastructures. That is the point one. The second one, I think that is very, very important. Yes, to push forward. We should make political decisions to push forward the reforms of existing international development financing institutions. So that we need necessities in the cases of World Bank, the ADB, and the regional development bank. So I think all these institutions should be more open to adapt to new realities, to the new realities of the distribution of economic power. So I think that we have to recognize this. So I think the established power of the largest stakeholders, I think there should be, should be mentioned this only by reform. So we can tap the great potential of capitalization. So I think that to meet the need of the developing countries. So related to this, so that we should, so I think existing the major economies, the members of G20, so they should be more open to the new initiatives, like I think the new development bank of the BRICS countries, okay, like the AIIB, okay, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, is the Chinese initiative, but which has got very positive responses from the countries like ASEAN, from the India, South Asia, and the Middle East. So that's a very interesting development, but I think unfortunately, on the some of case issues, so some countries also tend to look at these new initiatives more from the geopolitical security perspectives. So I think we need to talk to each other. So we need better consultations there. So as to if I think so I think that is very, very important. The G20 members should be more open to the new initiatives, and so we can see in the end we should work together for the better, more constructive agenda of G20 for the Turkish presidency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wang Yun. Also, thank you very much for your thought-provoking comments in the end, but we will talk about those later. Our next speaker is Nikola Jovanovic of CIRST, right, Nikolai?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Program Director of the Center for International Relations and Sustainable Development. I'm very privileged to be here, and I have enjoyed discussion in previous panels. So I will also try to provide some value added to the discussion. And I believe I could do that in two ways. First is our center is a sort of a regional hub for the new Silk Road when it enters Europe in the Balkans. So I will say a couple of things how I believe that global investment initiatives can change the situation, can be a game changer. Second thing is the fact that our senior staff had a privilege, were lucky enough, it was not based on merits, that my country held presidency of the UN General Assembly after the famous Rio +20 conference in 2012. So for 1 year, basically the senior staff for our institute was in charge of launching the work on the Sustainable Development Agenda. Again, it was not because of our talents, it's because of the pure luck. But then we saw some shortcomings of the UN. We saw contempt towards the G20 as an informal organization. So we basically put 7 or 6 months to lobby for the resolution that finally was adopted in 2013 by the General Assembly, which for the first time recognized the relevance and importance of G20 and called for the cooperation between the UN and G20 to work together to better global economic governance. That's why I, after the first session, I said that we have a document to build on, bearing in mind that the game changer could happen this year in the United Nations, although it seems unlikely given the shortcomings of the only universal organization. But basically this is the crucial year because some of the most difficult and complex multilateral negotiations that have ever taken place in the recent history are about to be concluded this year. First, in Ethiopia in July, we should have the key conference on financing for development. Then in September in New York, new development paradigm should be adopted by the General Assembly based on the concept of sustainable development. And finally, again under auspices of the UN, in December there is a final summit on climate that will take place in Paris, and that should give birth to a new Kyoto agreement, or it will all fail and maybe we will not have another chance. So basically we have a couple of opportunities to deliver some game changers this year, and it can be done in close cooperation between G20 and the United Nations and its member states. I have learned so far that the previous and current G20 presidency are working hard on several files, and I believe they are all pertinent. For example, we have heard that there has been a suggestion that each country should deliver some national investment targets. I believe this is very difficult, almost impossible, and there is a chance this ends up in failure, because this is why Kyoto never worked, because it was so difficult for member states to agree on a specific national quotas, targets, etc. How much country can invest. It's almost difficult to negotiate between so many member states and so many different actors. That's why I believe it cannot be a game changer. What can be game changer is new development paradigm, and we will have opportunity to try to adopt new one this year. Then we have heard that what also has been agreed is to add 2 points to the growth rate in 2013. This reminded us a little bit of the central planning and of wishful thinking, because I'm sure everybody, even in this room between us, will agree to add 2 points of growth next year to the growth of this year. And this can even be unanimous decision. But the question is, what's the idea behind it? Is there any vision behind it? Then what we also heard as a valiant effort, I'm sure, is that previous presidency agreed on 1,000 measures to be taken. I'm sure they're all pertinent again, but when you have suggestion of 1,000 measures, it can easily conceal lack of big ideas and big projects. It resembles more like doing business study of the World Bank than the political statement of the most powerful countries in the world. So leaving aside this new sustainable development agenda, let me just say a couple of points about the major investments in infrastructure. What is the situation today in the world? I will be extremely brief. We have a weak growth. Even the most dynamic engines of this world are slowing down, including Germany, including China. Then we have aging infrastructure in post-Soviet space, even in most developed countries. Then we have a general fatigue. For example, in Europe, it is reflected with the suspension of enlargement. And then we have a low demand, because as I said this morning, two of the most important economic engines of the world, beside the United States, of course, China and Germany, are locked within model that cannot endure permanently. Let me just give example of Germany. As I mentioned, Germany exports 50% of its GDP. 50%. And most of that is within the European Union. But at the same time, it recommends austerity policies under pretext that when you have balanced public finances, it will spur the private investments. It's not happening. The short European experience showed that without public-private partnership, when there is no public investments, there is also very few private investments. So basically, Germany is coming to the point that will not be able to export to European countries because they will not be in a situation to buy its goods. China also has a structural problem, but fortunately, it changes paradigm. Instead of basing its success on a cheap labor, China is now producing high-value goods, and it's investing a lot. And let me just say, to conclude with, about the new Silk Road and Europe, because we are, as I said, hub for this investment. In Eurasia, you have two main exporters. Between them, you have the biggest mass on this planet that comprises regions such as Caucasus, Central Asia, Balkans, that are rich in resources, but that are not part of the supply of the production chain. And that is the problem. In the previous discussion, we mentioned the importance of the free trade, but our experience tells us, Tom Piketty tells us, that if countries are not within the supply and production chain, inequality will rise within countries and between countries. So G20 should support any global initiative, global investment initiative that is trying to get the biggest number of countries into the high value supply chain. And the efforts that is now being made within the paradigm of the New Silk Road is doing exactly that. Is trying to connect two most important economic engines, Western Europe and China, but at the same time to add value along this way, whether it's going through railways or maritime road. So basically, why shouldn't G20 endorse some of the most important development agenda that it's being debated and decided this year? Why doesn't G20, instead of 1,000 measures, support global projects that are there to build up infrastructure? Because also one of the lessons, and I will finish with that, is that you can have free trade agreement. Greeks have a free trade agreement since 1981. And it's serious. But basically they have been left out of the production chain. They have been made consumers. And now probably they're going to be forced to leave the Eurozone. And we learned that this is also a major concern of G20, and it should be, because Greece will be forced to leave Eurozone in next 10 months. We have already seen what this has done to value of euro, for example. So making strategic investments is good for everybody, is a win-win situation, and I believe there is no reason G20 shouldn't endorse such a major capital investment instead of doing business in X country like it does actually now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicola. This was very interesting and very concrete and also provoking, I think, but anyway, we'll talk about it later. I'm sure we will have a lot of questions to discuss. Now, we have Richard Manning, Professor Richard Manning, who kindly agreed to join us from Oxford. He could not be here, but we very much appreciate his presence. Thank you very much for joining us. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Can you all hear me?
We can
Good.
hear you, yes.
Well, I had the privilege of being in Istanbul yesterday, and I'd like to start by thanking our Turkish hosts for the great work they've done in both the B20 and today in the T20 environment. I'd like to just reflect on one thing said at the B20 yesterday, where the chair was arguing that we need to think more about infrastructure as an asset class in which people should be ready to invest, because as a complement to what our other speakers have said, I'm going to talk today mainly about how we can do a better job of getting more private funds into infrastructure. We all know, and it's been said already, that we need a mix of public and private finance. In principle, there are large amounts of private funds, few of which are actually invested in productive infrastructure. And my argument is that G20 has a great opportunity to work together, particularly with the multilateral development banks, and we've already talked quite a bit about the multilateral development banks, to move this forward. And the G20 has a strong majority position in the boards of these institutions and is well equipped to have that kind of conversation. So I'd like to put forward a few concrete thoughts on what could be done differently and better within the MDB system to encourage a stronger flow of private money into what projects that have to be well considered, sustainable, and meet all the usual objectives of both economic, social, and environmental viability. And bringing the MDBs with their due diligence into this is a very important way of achieving that. So, first of all, I think there needs to be a message to our friends in the multilateral development banks and the development finance institutions about increasingly using their funds in a way that leverage private investment, so that where there is an opportunity to bring in private investment, let's not try and fully fund it by the MDBs, let's try and bring private investment in. I think a very important one is that many of the international financial institutions, one might think of the International Finance Corporation, but also several of the regional banks, have long-standing stakes in pretty successful organizations that deliver infrastructure in power utilities, in port corporations and so on. And I think a stronger policy from shareholders to encourage these institutions to divest their mature stakes in these projects would be very desirable from 2 points of view. First of all, by doing this, they would be able to recycle their funds into the riskier parts of the investment when you're trying to get towards financial close, and that's where the risks are highest, and that's where the MDBs can be most effective. And secondly, by selling on these mature investments, they help precisely to build this kind of asset class to which the Turkish chairman was referring yesterday, which encourage pension funds, insurance funds, and other institutional investors to get involved. Such funds are not going to invest in a single project, which is too risky for their kind of risk profile, but they might well be prepared to invest in a pool of assets that are already operating and where these funds could be used and work in a viable way. Thirdly, I think it's really important that we always keep a very strong focus on developing local capital markets. I was hearing the other day that Nigeria, just to take one example, already has nearly $30 billion of funds in its pension funds. It's very important that the MDBs do a better job of trying to develop these capital markets. I think there's scope for use of guarantees and the like. And I think that most investors will be much more comfortable if there's significant local investment in many of these infrastructure projects that we talk about. After all, infrastructure projects typically earn local currency, not hard currency, and that makes local investors all the more important. Fourthly, I'd like to encourage the IFIs to use their convening power in two ways. First of all, to do more to mobilize private investors at an earlier stage. We've talked a lot about, again yesterday, about project preparation and are the projects actually out there for people to invest in. I think there's a lot more that the international financial institutions can do. I've watched with interest the African Development Bank's new Africa 50 proposal, for example. And we have, as our Chinese colleague has just reminded us, we have 2 new banks about to start. And this is a great opportunity to get some of these things right. And I'd also like to hear the multilateral banks talk more strongly internationally. And this is, again, a very proper G20 subject, to ensure that as G20 and others undertake the prudential regulation, which is certainly necessary in the financial system, they don't do so in ways that discourage productive investment. And I think it's very easy for decisions to be taken by finance ministries, who are very risk-averse people, which try and make money as safe as possible and thus inhibit funds being used in productive ways, which could be really valuable, particularly for the developing countries who have a huge infrastructure backlog to overcome. So I'd like to see the G20 encourage the multilateral banks to take a stronger role, and the G20 itself to examine, whenever it brings in a new consensus about regulation, that it should always look at what are the implications for productive investment within that. And finally, and I think this is a very important point that comes back again to the idea of creating an asset class that people can invest in, the more we can standardize agreements for whether it's PPAs, power offtake agreements, or the rest of it, the more that documentation can be standardized, the fewer fees everybody will pay to expensive lawyers, the fewer risks investors will face, and the greater the ability of people to invest in well-known legal structures. And there's an interesting example in relation to renewable energy in South Africa, where a succession of projects was let by the South African government for wind energy, I think, on exactly the same legal basis, and each time it was done by competitive bidding. Each time the request for a return on equity by the investors fell because they got more and more comfortable with the way of doing business and risks reduced, and that we have to do that in order to achieve this. And the final recommendation I would make is a bit more specific. In Africa in particular, but also in other underexplored parts of the world, there is going to be a huge development of mineral resources over the next 50 years. One of the features of many of these projects is that they require large amounts of very expensive infrastructure. It might be a rail link to get iron ore to a port. It certainly requires port facilities. It requires power. It requires water. And there are two ways of doing this infrastructure. One is for it all to be operated by the owner of the mine and be used just for the purposes of the mine. And the other is, as far as possible, to enable it to be shared by the community. So if you build a rail link, there ought to be possibilities for other mine operators to use the same railway rather than having to build at penal cost two links to do the same thing, and also to enable the local economy to get some benefit, say from power projects. And I think there's again a great scope for the international financial institutions to encourage this more when they're financing these developments, to develop, and I think this would be really valuable, a set of principles, rather like the Equator Principles, which would be about good practice. We talked earlier about good practice. I think this is an area where good practice would be very valuable. It's technically very complicated. It needs doing. And finally, and I think this is crucial across investment, to do more to sponsor regulatory and dispute resolution mechanisms which would deal with the legal questions that arise out of decisions of this sort. So those are a suggestion for a few things that the G20 could really encourage multilateral banks to do, and that the G20 itself could do through the institutions in which many G20 members themselves invest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. I will be loyal to the title of this event, which is a workshop, so I'm not going to try to summarize these speeches. Instead, I'm going to go directly to the questions and answers. So please, if you have any questions, raise your hand, introduce yourself, and ask your question. We need another one of these. There's a lady on the second row here.
Yes, hello, Veronica Grondona from Cefidar, Argentina. Well, in relation to infrastructure, some very interesting expositions have been made, so I won't say much. But another alternative that should be considered is, we think, intergovernmental agreements. In a way, that has helped our country in the last period. In relation to infrastructure, and particularly with China, actually. Yes. So that's an alternative way of financing infrastructure. And additionally, the role of the regional banks should also be enhanced over the other multilateral development banks like the World Bank and so on, which have had not so successful experiences in the past, or that there's new alternatives in like Andes banks and the BRICS banks that can be thought of, and also the recovery of the central role of government banks in local environments in developing countries, like Banades Bank in Brazil, which is also an experience from which to learn. So that's all I.
The gentleman here.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the panelists. This is Murat Özgören from 9 Eylül University, but my other hat is I'm part of the forum member for European Strategy Forum of Research Infrastructures. And my question would be to address any of the panelists upon the condition that those research infrastructures have a value of billions of euros or dollars, and through some concert action like hubs and nodes model, you can drive huge amount of knowledge into transition of economic growth. It had been experienced in many places. When this strategically comes with, together with the smart specialization, what's so-called, with the investment support from European Investment Bank and things like that, what you produce is totally, absolutely new. You are not redirecting any former resources, you're producing something new. So not only like technology development, but there are very add-on values, like in Silicon Valley and the others, but this phenomenon of research infrastructures, how do you see that it would fit into your definition of infrastructures through a support mechanism that would make a very homogeneous growth in different parts of the world? Thank you.
There's a gentleman there in the middle, right there. He's waiting, so we will come back to you. Okay. Let's also move around, it's better. Go ahead.
Yudo Kang from the Kiev. Actually, I have a question and comment on a speech of Nicola. During a Euro crisis in 2000 and 2012, several European teams, such as Investment Bank and some company, came to Asia to promote investment in Europe. Actually, some investors asked a question saying that if Greece leave a Eurozone in 1 year, 2 years, actually my investment done in Greece will be going down because of exchange rate and so on. I think same question can be raised right now, and you expect that Greece will leave Eurozone in next 10 months. In that case, who dare to invest in Greece or periphery country of Eurozone? Actually, in that sense, it's very important to have economic stability inside the Eurozone. The attaching the country like Greece to Eurozone. And then second comment and question is that I'm totally agree that between Germany and China, in Eurasia continent, there's a huge occasion and opportunity for investment. That should be done. But the problem is that I think it's a rather geopolitical concern, such as a conflict between the European Union and Russia on Ukrainian issues. Is there any mechanism or way to detour that kind of geopolitical concern, just focusing on economic opportunity? Actually, that will be the whole experience of the European Union based on a functional approach. Actually, is done by that way. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Please.
Thank you, Mehmet Arda. I have a comment, I think. One is that I think infrastructure is very important, but it has two aspects. One is the domestic infrastructure. I don't think the United States or the states or other developed countries require the G20 in order to improve their own infrastructure. So I think what's important is the connectivity, that regional or global connectivity that is of concern to the G20. And there I have a point which I think I should make, and that is it is not only a physical infrastructure that matters as far as connectivity is concerned. Especially for the landlocked countries, the transit corridors are very important, and I was wondering how that can be made to be part of the G20 agenda as far as infrastructure and connectivity is concerned. Infrastructure, as long as it is, if it's, I understand it is like roads rather than big dams and stuff like that. So as far as that, one good step was, of course, the trade facilitation agreement, but there's more that can go into that, like in the transit corridors issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Vishal Kasımlı, Center for Strategic Studies, and the President of Azerbaijan. The majority of G20 countries are conducting stimulus package and bailout programs, which linked up to infrastructure projects as well. So I think, first of all, there should be correlation between the productivity of infrastructure projects and the interest rate. Because from the perspective of Ricardian equilibrium, today's investment are tomorrow's additional tax. This is the first point. The second point is related with, as Professor mentioned from Oxford, private sector involvement. Because the demand for infrastructure investment in the next decade will outstrip the funding capacity of governments alone. So private sector involvement is critical. And the global infrastructure hub initiative could help unlock additional $2 trillion US dollars, including private sector investment in the infrastructure to 2030. From that perspective, I really appreciate the fund created by China, Silk Road Fund, which is very important. And my colleague from Serbia mentioned about the great revitalization of Great Silk Road, because there are some maritime and land-based options between China and Europe, and the shortcut way between the top two exporter nations, such as Germany and China, is a Great Silk Road. And of course, China in its turn launched fund, Silk Road Fund, but little countries in this case, like Azerbaijan, contributes to revitalize the Great Silk Road. For example, we, together with our other neighbors like Turkey and Georgia, launched Baku-Tbilisi-Gars railroad infrastructure project, which is very important because after collapse of Soviet Union, railroad connection fell into disuse. And that's why two countries, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, decided to launch new railroad connection in order to revitalize the Great Silk Road in terms of railroad connection. And Baku-Tbilisi-Gars further will be link up Marmara project on the Bosphorus Strait, which interacts pan-European and Turkish railroad network. In this case, from Hong Kong to Frankfurt, you can just travel or conduct your goods through this railroad option. So it is very important to invest in infrastructure projects that reduce cost of goods and services, which lead to productivity, which is the first challenge of economic crisis in nowadays. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll take one more and then we will answer the questions, and then there's the Italian gentleman. I don't know your name.
Thank you very much. Antonio Villafranca from ESP Milan. Well, very briefly, I think that there is one point on which also the Turkish presidency of the G20 should really insist this year, which is the need for further investments in Europe. That is extremely important for Turkey, but it is extremely important for economy worldwide, because simply such a stagnation in Europe is unbearable. It is also politically unsustainable. You mentioned many times also the Grexit, the possibility that Greece, it's just a possibility, by the way, because you keep saying by 9 months, no, it's a possibility, let me say remote possibility, because we have been saying so for 3-4 years. So, okay, let's cut down, because I'm totally sure that everybody will be the best in order to avoid this scenario, which is first the worst scenario for Greece, first of all. But so, in order to avoid also this problem, investments is the key. And there is the new plan by the European Commission, by Mr. Juncker, promising 300 billion euros in 3 years, okay? Which is very optimistic, actually, because, there is, a mechanism involving also private funding, which is, very difficult to achieve, okay? I wish luck, very good luck, but I don't think it will be like this, but I want to be surprised. The point is that what we miss in Europe today is 300 billion euros of investment per year. So even if we were, so clever to reach the ceiling of 300 billion euros in 3 years, there will be, still 600 billion euros of investments which will be missing. So the point is that one single item should be added for me in the final declaration of the Turkish presidency, and that is, we should let, and the European Union should also let European states to invest inside the state, even beyond the Maastricht criteria, 3% of deficit GDP, 60% debt GDP. Otherwise, there would be no economic growth, and most of all, this situation is going to be politically unsustainable. Thank you.
Very good comment. Thank you very much. I will now ask our panelists to answer the questions. Then we will come back again one more round. Other than the directed or pointed questions to names, I will ask all the panelists if they wish to respond. And I will give the first word to Richard in Oxford. Problem in connection, or you don't want to talk?
I think that what's been said shows that the need to invest in infrastructure is something that is within all countries. We've heard how it's moving in China. We hear how it needs to move in Europe. And I think that for all countries, it's going to be this mix of public and private finance that's going to do it. So that's why I put the emphasis in what I've had to say on how the public sector and the scarce asset which we have in the regional banks, the World Bank, the IFC, and the other institutions, and the banks, if you look at Europe, in the EIB and the national development banks of countries like China and Brazil and so on, you have huge areas of strength where the public sector is able to both finance certain things, but also to risk share with the private sector. And in order to get this multiplier effect, we're going to have to be more skillful at leveraging private funds, particularly private institutional funds, which are looking for more productive outlets. So I think that the message that I was talking about was perhaps aimed more particularly at developing countries, but I think the same issues arise very much in the more developed countries, where there is undoubtedly a serious problem of financing productive infrastructure, and where indeed there are large institutional investors who at the moment are investing a lot of their money in very low-yielding government stock. Added to that, as a colleague was telling me yesterday, when you see the terms on which the public sector can now borrow in certain countries, these are exceptionally favorable. There's seldom been times when so many countries could borrow so cheaply. Surprising situation when you look at some other things. And more intelligent ways of using the borrowing capacity that appears to exist at the moment is also something that the G20 might want to give some thought to. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a lot of good points from the floor. I would like to make short responses to the several points. The first of all is about the nature of or category of infrastructure. I think it's definitely, that is have a software and the hardware side of its investment in the infrastructures. I think there's no doubt about that. So I think in some cases of the developing countries, so investment is in the information infrastructures, for examples. It needs the investment in the hardware, but it can produce very positive effects to the growth. So I think that to speed up the flow of transformation of information, for examples, to link the people and the markets. Okay, at the margin of the far away, the areas to the economic center. So I think that is can make very important things. So in the examples like Chinese telecommunication company, Huawei or the ZTE, they have investment in the information infrastructure in Africa, in some countries in Africa. So there is the change. They change a lot the economy. So the local people, with the assistance or to the access to the mobile phone and internet, they find there's more the economic opportunities. So they better off. So I think that is we have a lot of interesting the cases to the study. So I think G20 we should pay attention to the cases like this. Second point, is about that is the private, the public investment, in the projects of items. So the infrastructures. So I think yes, I think the key difficulty, difficult issues in the infrastructure things, how to ensure the more investment from private sector. In the field of infrastructures. Okay, so I think that is for understandable reasons. The private the capital, they are looking for profit, but how to while the arrangement between the governments, all the regional development institutions, to help them to ensure. They are the midterm, mid-term or the long-term the profits. I think that is. I think definitely we have a lot of things to how to like PPP, right? So let's see public-private partnership. So I think a lot of space is for that. A third point, it's about the China's new Silk Roads initiatives, right? So I think the friends talk about, in Chinese now, we call it one belt and one road. So I think that is a new Silk Road initiatives. Now I have attracted a lot of attention. So I think the point one related to this is to put the emphasis on the building the intercompatibilities of the local transportation systems in different countries in the sector regions. So I think that is some initiatives to help set up the link. As a second thing, very interesting to look at almost all the countries along the line, along the routes of the Silk Roads, have their own versions of Silk Road initiatives. So what China can do is to generate a big platform for the countries to talk to each other. In some cases, China be interesting to provide it financial support. So that is fairly, I think that it might be very interesting to look at this initiatives. In some cases we say, okay, the Silk Road have to be related to the high geopolitical risk areas. For example, in Middle East, right? There is a lot of things, very, very complicated things. But I think it can give us hope with these new initiatives. Maybe we can, of the countries, stakeholders, right? The different countries can sit down, to work with each other. So I think that is something, if we can grasp these opportunities, for example, so I think we can give us better political prospects to find some way to get off the shadow of high risk geopolitics. Thank you.
Let me try to answer your question. Among other things, you mentioned geopolitics. Is it possible that big initiatives that are supposed to be win-win can somehow survive geopolitical challenges? My answer is no, because we cannot escape human condition, and geopolitics is part of it. And that's why we need to take good care to monitor, to observe, to prevent the worst sides of it. Francis Fukuyama mentioned the end of history. It's not happening. History is speeding up. I'm sure many of fine ladies and gentlemen were in Davos previous year, and they issue a report, Global Risks. So in the report, Global Risks for 2014, there was no mention of oil prices. There was no mention of ISIS. Picture this, there was no mention of Ukraine. So we are not witnessing the end of history, we are witnessing the speeding up of history. Luckily for this project, One Belt, One Road, the New Silk Road, the one important branch of the New Silk Road is bypassing Russia and Ukraine, but still at the present time, the main corridor for trade between Western Europe and China, inland corridor, is via Kazakhstan and Russia. Since a couple of months ago, for the first time, whole BMWs assembled are going from Duisburg to China. And of course, a new Cold War would be a great setback, both for Russia and for Europe, but it's happening right now. Also, let me just say a few words about Greece. Of course, it will not be rational for Greece to exit Eurozone. Europeans do not want the collapse of the customs union. Greeks do not want to introduce drachmas. But what I'm afraid of is currently in Europe, the austerity has gained the proportions of ideology. Because it's easy to say we are good guys, they are bad guys. And when there is ideology, then the rational choices are not always taken. And even in Greece, ideology has won. Syriza is an ideological party. It's not a group of experts. So we have collision of two ideologies, and that's why I mentioned there is a possibility, but that would be a lose-lose situation. I agree with our Italian colleague. And he mentioned, and our panelists mentioned, of course, it's worthless to, it's even needless to say that investment in infrastructure is good. But why is it not happening? That is my question. The aging infrastructure is not my talking point. It's the title of special edition of Foreign Affairs from 2014 with regard to the United States. In Europe, you mentioned the new package of the new European Commission President, and of course it should be a step in the right direction. But why does European Commission not exclude capital investment from the rules on public debt and public deficits? Because let us not forget, the biggest enemy is not public debt. It's public debt when it's not used in a proper way. Because if you use public debt to build infrastructure, then you have property, you have tangible value added. So basically, you shouldn't be that much worried. But when you use public debt to finance welfare system that can no longer be, in that case, of course, it's the enemy of economic growth. And the last point, Mr. Chairman, of course, public-private partnership is the key. And of course, Silicon Valley didn't occur in a garage, as a popular myth says. It appeared in a country where state has invested in technology, in technological infrastructure. We all know what DARPA is. It's not NGO. And based on the knowledge and investment and know-how on DARPA, some talented individuals were in position to make a breakthrough. And last point, just one sentence. I was listening carefully to the previous panel, and our esteemed colleagues, of course, with a lot of wisdom, mentioned the importance of transatlantic partnership and trans-Pacific partnership. And they said they are game changers. Let us not forget that for Europe and East Asia, what is of crucial importance also is Indian Ocean. Now, Indian Ocean and Mediterranean are becoming one of the main maritime routes for a trade between extremely rich part of the world, East Asia and Western Europe. Let me stop there.
Thank you. Now we'll take a few more questions and then we will end. Sorry about this. Please.
I want to push our panelists. I thought very, very great, not only initial commentaries, but very nice, very great responses. So I think it's fair to point out that the G20 discussion has evolved quite a lot since it first started under the Korean presidency. If you recollect, under the Korean presidency, the discussion was, let's identify a bunch of bankable projects and the financing will come. Since then, the discussion has moved very much in the way that Richard Manning pointed out. There's a focus now on how to make the state work better, how the state can lead in the process, how to get the capacity to do better PPPs, how to develop local currency bond markets, and how to use institutional investors to better finance. So there are lots of progress. But I do think that there are two areas where there's still contradictions, and I'm going to just push the panelists a little bit on that. First is the role of the multilateral development banks. So Richard mentioned that they should be doing more to help catalyze the private sector. But I would add that they just need to do more. And let me explain what I mean by that. So today, the total amount of infrastructure investment in emerging markets and developing countries is in the order of about 1.2 trillion. How much do the multilateral development banks do in terms of new greenfield projects? 20 to 30 billion. A drop in the ocean. So it's not a question of doing more for the private sector, it's just a question of doing more. So Richard then said that actually they don't have so much capital. But there is a lot of capital. You know, there's a huge amount of capital and a huge amount of savings that can be channeled to these institutions, but the institutions and the stakeholders need to allow for the changes of governance that would then allow these institutions to scale up. And which is why we have the BRICS Bank and which is why we have the new China initiative and all that. So one of the fundamental issues of the multilateral development banks has to be the willingness to adjust governance. And I think that's something that hasn't been mentioned, and I'd like to get some reaction from the panelists. The other is that we are at a structural moment in time. In the next 25 years, if you believe the OECD, you believe the Better Growth, Better Climate report, you believe what the UN is saying, we're going to invest in the order of about 90 trillion in infrastructure assets. That's like changing the complete footprint of the world in new cities, in new transport systems, in new water systems, in new patterns of energy generation. Yet today, we are investing with the technology of the old. We are repeating all the bad ways of the old. So another word that we, my colleague mentioned here, sustainability and sustainable development goals, but the reality is that the new investments that are being made are not sustainable. And how do you ensure the sustainability of this? How do you ensure that you don't destroy the world's climate is something that has not featured in the G20 discussions. So I'd just like to put those two and for reaction. Thank you.
I think those are very good points. Let me just very quickly respond to your first point, because we are both MDB people. You are also a retiree of the World Bank. I think you know the answer. It's the governance issue. That's the governance issue. We can talk about it, but it will take an hour here. It's a very good point, though. It's the key point.
Well, I have felt I heard two different Nikolais. During his presentation, I felt like he was, with his terminology, policy suggestions, etc. I felt he was suggesting a new version of socialist mode of economic development. And during his answers to questions, I felt him as one of the IMF guys suggesting, all known policy suggestions. But my question is, with this focus on investment, infrastructure investment, how does this fit into G20's, the agenda of balanced growth path, and putting all those, I don't know his name, but he also mentioned the same thing. Putting all those money, maybe we can talk about the global investment, saving a lot, but when we think about the individual countries such as Turkey, saving rate in Turkey is about 14%. So, saving is not in all countries, more than investment. So there is this balanced growth path problem and the sustainability problem. As we all know that the investment in infrastructure is a long-term investment, and productivity of those investments depends on whether private investment will follow, and it requires certain economic environment for the private investment to flow in. That's my question. Thank you.
Another question, or okay, one more. Oh, she was waiting from the first session. Sorry.
I got two. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. The first one, actually, I think is more like follow the discussion by Amo, and I'm wondering that should we suggest to build up our MDB's commission, because so far, as far as we know, that we have so many different kinds of MDB. I mean, multilateral developing banks, World Bank, and some regional MDBs, and some of their business are overlap. And besides that, I think this could be facilitate their sharing their experience on project. So that's I don't know. Do you think it's a possibility for that? I ask for the speakers. And the second one is that about Islamic finance. I think right now we must have some Turkish scholar know about it, because Islamic bonds is a very particular one. Maybe we should, on G20, we should promote this kind of bonds. Because in my mind, I think they have a similar, conception as the PPPs. It's more like a public and private partnership. So I want to hear what's your thoughts, especially maybe not just on the speakers, it's also to the Turkish scholars. Thank you.
Okay, let's respond now. With your last question on Islamic finance. The answer is yes. I think it's in the agenda of G20, because when we were in the initial stages talking about what will be the priorities for G20 and B20, Islamic finance came as one of the priorities. And exactly the same reason that you cited, that Sukuk, which is the Islamic bond, is a very useful tool for financing infrastructure, plus in general long-term finance. unless and as soon as long as you have assets to back your instruments. I'll go back to our panelists again to respond to or to make final comments maybe about Ammar's and other colleagues' points. I'll start with again Richard, and then we will complete. Thank you. Please.
Well, it's always a pleasure to listen to Ammar, and of course he's quite right. The MDBs should be doing more across the board, and the MDBs have to be fit for purpose to do that. I think we all know what the answer is, and it's ironic that because the US Congress doesn't want to move in the IMF, that nobody is moving in the multilateral banks. In my opinion, which is the part of the world that is overrepresented in the multilateral banks? It's not the United States, it's Europe. And the answer to the problem that our Chinese colleagues have very reasonably put forward is that Europe has to shrink its share of the votes of most of these institutions, and Europe should compensate for that by radically shrinking the number of its representatives, and at the end of the day Europe would have a smaller share and more influence. We all know this, but the Europeans are hopelessly unstrategic about doing anything about it and are hiding behind the Americans. You can quote me on that. I think I don't have anything very clever to say on the environment side. I mean, of course, you're right. I mean, it is rather concerning that we talk these telephone numbers of the amount of investment we need, and at the same time we're talking about how we can manage a very significant and problematical sustainability problem. And I do think the G20, and maybe this group in particular, with the think tanks, should try and bring these two narratives a bit closer together. It's not, but I think we have to be very careful that we don't, as it were, tell developing countries that they must use technologies that may not be quite so efficient as some of the old ones, because they're the ones who are doing most of the investment. I think it's very much down to the more established countries to ensure that they themselves are using their infrastructure in a way that is more sustainable. So I think it's a message for the whole world and not just for the developing countries.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're short responses to the Ammar's point. So you see, I think I totally share. Okay, so the US points. So on this, so I think the G20 should highlight the continuities. You're talking about the G20 agenda. I think that is true. I no doubt about that. The second is to relate to the point. It's fundamentally speaking, it's the problem with governance. So it's not a problem of money. It's the government issues. Okay, that is something I think our panel working on that about it. Thirdly, I think we already have a lot of good discussions. Now we need actions. So we need to implement these good ideas to push forward the reforms. So I think that is something I think that we share. Okay. Thank you.
Maybe just a short point. Of course, sir, money is there. The decision not to invest, for example, in Europe is a political decision. It's not economic decision. And the question of multinational banks partially is a response to the failure of Bretton Woods institution to reform themselves. And I'm afraid, and sometimes it's complementary, it's a good news, but sometimes it's suboptimal. That's why I believe G20 should, in a way, be world economic government. Does world need economic government? Of course. But the G20 can work with full legitimacy, only hand in hand with the United Nations. And as Bretton Woods institutions have not reformed, my biggest fear is that United Nations will not reform itself. And at least once in the history, United Nations saved the world from the nuclear holocaust. At least once. So we must give them that. But at the same time, we see today in different parts of the world that United Nations is seeking into irrelevancy, and maybe that should be our biggest fear. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Wang Wei just mentioned for the MBD Commission. So I think it's a feasible solution to share with the different experience. Especially, I think the existing ADB Bank, World Bank, or other development bank, they have so many practice and good experience to share to the new the new institution funds, such as I mentioned the AIIB, or just a few minutes we talk about the Silk Road funds. These all new for the financing platform for the infrastructure. I think they are still to learning and to learn from the existing experience and to explore for the new future. Then I think China is trying our best to follow the good practice from the existing institution, and we will see later when we take the real action. Thank you.
I think the pressure is on anyway, on the Bretton Woods institutions because of what's happening. And I think it's a very healthy pressure, and I hope that we achieve the objective that we are after. There are a lot of questions that we could not have the time to discuss, including the issues related to AIIB and BRICS Bank and how to make better use of those, etc. But this is your job as the content leader. I hope you took good notes so that you raise it with the G20, and we will make you responsible. Thank you very much. It was fascinating. We very much appreciate your presence.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, panelists.